Oh, major vehicles. Major indeed. something, and I should just arrange for them to do a private tour or something.
Yeah, I'm surprised you haven't been charged.
fabulous thing, isn't it? Yeah, God. Bit like Germany will shout that out when it. Oh, hindsight, we should have shut the borders. Yeah, too late, mate. I'll be dead.
Too soon. same thing.
Well, Sasha's tried to get in 13 times apparently, and he keeps getting thrown out.
Oh my
He was in
gosh.
earlier with his gold, but now he's having fun.
Yeah, I see two people. Yep. Oh, cool.
Hey everyone!
Wow!
Hey,
Now
who's that?
turn your volume down again. It's all gravelly at the edges.
Alright. Is this better?
That's
Yeah.
it, please.
Alright. Let's just start again.
We're waiting for Sarah. Yeah. Okay, just sit here.
Hey everyone, after streaming on YouTube and Twitter. So, no, yeah, like me. Yeah.
You got a wonderful
Mickey.
voice.
How's it going, Mickey?
Mickey,
It's
you've
like
come with
Sasha's
that
coming
cheat
back.
and you've ran round
Hey,
once
Mickey.
already. Here's Sasha. He's trying again. Somnium Sasha in 2D. Yeah, that's a good sign actually.
Whoa.
So it means you'll drop into position. Yes. Ta-da! There you go. If it goes down into the ground, that's another. I see another little speckly thing over there moving. Something's coming this way. Is wait, there's no special.
Yeah. I've seen it. Yeah.
The number of textures on the plot, I'm more now limited by the number of images I can squeeze into, a shape texture. So I've got over the 15 then. So I'm having about 60. Hi, Shin is in. How you doing, dude?
I'm doing good. I was rushing to get here. I got stopped by the update, so I was like,
Yeah,
shit.
no worries. That's why we sort of hung around for a bit, so other people can get us all together. You might want to bring your volume up slightly, although I'm probably going to be doing all the waffling. But
Yeah, no, I can fix that. I'm just gonna do that.
Tommy.
Choose.
Choose. You get? I think he's not German.
We have some echoing going on.
Yeah, I think it's Tommy's giving feedback.
Sorry.
That's all right, dude.
No
I will
worries.
keep my mic. Wait a sec.
Turn your mic off if you like, because I should be waffling and then asking questions at the end if you like.
We've got 8 people. Oh, there's another.
That's Arthur, I think. I recognise the shorts.
Yeah, they stand out, don't they?
They do a bit, don't they? It's either that or his hairy legs, one of the two.
Oh, it's Shiro.
Oh, it's Cheryl. He's not Arthur. I thought it was Arthur. Oh, he's probably floating around.
No, it's putting the Arthur. That's a restricted avatar, though. Only cool Afrobeat can wear that.
Okay, guys. So, come on in then. Stand in here for a moment. Right, let me first of all thank you all for coming. Absolute,
You're very
it's
quiet.
great for me to, I'm very quiet, I might. Let me step forward to the microphone.
Crank it to the
Yeah,
max.
sounds good to me.
Okay,
Crank
maybe
it.
it's just me. I'll check my volume.
Okay, but I
That's
just want to
70%.
thank you all for coming
Thank you,
anyway, because it's great to have a good group here when you're running through these sort of topics. And I'm wide open to discussion, but I do have my own opinion like everybody else. And on here, more than anything, I don't believe we went to the moon in '69. I think Apollo 11 was a complete and utter scam. Now, I've got simple reasons for that, but instead, so that you guys can all have a good old look and have a good old think afterwards, I've got loads and loads of pictures along here so that hopefully as I go through them, it'll get you thinking. That's all I want to do. I'm not here to change anyone's mind. I'm not here to say my idea is the only way. It's a great discussion point. And whilst I'm waffling, there's another one coming in the distance over there. Hello, another person, whoever you are. So it's great. There goes Carlos. Okay, so what I'm going to do basically is take you through each of the pictures in turn, and hopefully you'll really be able to
Wilson,
just
welcome.
see what you think.
Wilson.
So first things first, we have of course the takeoff. Now from takeoff to splashdown, we only have the word of NASA. We only have them as a main source of all the technical data and the information about what's going on once that rocket is out of our sight. Now, for me as a conspiracy theorist, I don't look upon NASA as the National Aeronautical and Space Administration. I look upon it meaning I need another space actor or never a straight answer, one of the two. But basically, you've got your three heroes down at the bottom left here, Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins and Edwin Buzz Aldrin. And the first thing I draw your attention to is the bottom center image. This is Michael Collins in the parabolic plane practicing for his moonwalk. And you can see him hanging there inside the body of the plane as it goes over the top and then drops down. And as it drops down, he will be weightless for about 20 to 25 seconds. Now that's all well and good, and I'm sure he had a whale of a time doing it. But look at the picture bottom right. That is literally a mirror image of the center bottom. Now, this is being passed off in his own book, an autobiography, in space doing the moonwalk. It's been put out in NASA as him being in space doing the moonwalk. But if you look, every single strap is in exactly the same place. Every little strap hanging at an angle is in the same place. His arms, his feet, it's a mirror image of the original. So that's my first question. Why put out a lie? Second panel. Up here, of course, at the top, you have North America. And every dot really represents a business that was involved in the Apollo program. over 20,000 businesses took part in designing, building, creating, software design, everything in the Apollo program. Now, the debunkers, you might say my opposite number, says to me, there's 400,000 people involved there. Are you seriously trying to tell me, Mr. Snakey, that not one person spoke up in 50 years? Not one person said something? Well, I'll agree with that, but I'll also turn it back on him, because I would say, are you seriously trying to tell me that all 400,000 people that were involved in the Apollo programs were in on the scam? I don't think so. An example I'll give you, Volkswagen actually had a new car brought out in 2015, and they sold it openly. There you go, lovely new car, go and buy one, and people went off and bought them. And then when it got to the point of them going in for what we call in Britain an MOT, I don't know what you other countries called it, but it's like our yearly check on the roadworthiness of a vehicle. They found that most of these cars, if not all of them, did not meet the fumes release allowances. In other words, like all the fumes that go out into the air, they have to meet a certain criteria, and they all failed. Now, again, I'll use that as a similarity to these dots up here on the map, is that are we trying to seriously say that every single person that worked at Volkswagen were in on that scam? Probably just a few technicians and the senior management. But when it came down to it, A was just told to build that engine, and he did. B was told to put those pistons in, and they did. They weren't involved in the scam. And for the same reason, I would say that about the Apollo program. 400,000 people, over 20,000 businesses, all part of the Apollo program. But there's no way in the world that I would expect that 400,000 people were in on this arrangement of faking the moon trip. Top center is, of course, the Van Allen radiation belts. Now, that is another huge line where I draw it against the possibility of man going into space. Now, the NASA will put out a report and say, oh, well, when they went through that, they took only about as much X-rays as one chest X-ray, or 3 years of life on this planet. They only had that little bit of radiation. Well, you'll see later on how I say not a chance with that, because I've got two other bits of information I'll mention further around the tour, which will just bring that into doubt. So Van Allen radiation belts, well, they were discovered by an astrophysicist, James Van Allen, in 1958. And he realized that there was a massive amount of radiation there, because he sent a Geiger counter up with some of the early Horizon versions going up, or the rockets going up. And it was on an elliptical orbit. At its highest point, I think it went just about 1,000 miles up, 1,200 miles up. And at its lowest point, it was 200 miles up. And constantly, the images that they were getting back from this Geiger counter was it was rising and rising and rising, and then suddenly dropping down to zero, and then rising and rising and rising and dropping again. Now, when he got all the data back and they analyzed it, they realized that there was so much radiation building up as this craft went higher and higher towards the Van Allen belts that the Geiger counter couldn't register it, and it forced itself to reset so that it could then start scanning again. So I personally don't think in a million years we've been through that Van Allen radiation belt. And it's actually echoed by NASA. Shock horror, actually had to admit that we've never been through it. But no, that's not a really, really short tour. I'll explain why as we go along. Top right of that next panel is actually the white overall. That's the common thing you see on all of the astronaut pictures. When you see everyone walking around, bouncing around on the moon and all this stuff, they're in a white overall. The actual suit is the bottom center. That's the actual pressure suit. Now, the human body requires about 5 pounds per inch air pressure on it. Otherwise, our blood will boil. We'll be dead in about 15 seconds. So we need to wear a pressure suit. So you can't walk around in that huge, great thing like that unless you've got a nice sort of overall over the top, and then that's a bit more eye candy for us when we're looking at people bouncing around on the alleged moon. But you can see the sort of gloves he's got, huge articulated gloves on each hand. The pressure rings on the wrist or just above the wrist where it all locks together. But there's a question I have about this suit as well. If you move in closer to the image, you will see just, if I can get to it, this little section here, black and white striping there. That in actual fact, if you have a close look at the books and the information that you will find on, I think it's called spacecamp.com, that in actual fact is a zip. I've never seen a zip in a pressure suit. Wouldn't the air just pour out around the teeth? Yes, there could probably be a rubber seal behind it, but still the suit needs to inflate. It needs to be up to pressure to keep us alive if we're up on the moon. So one of the other things is, of course, the camera. These are Hasselblad cameras, absolute cream of the crop for the time that they were being made. They were containing a Zeus 60 lens, very, very nice lens indeed. And the whole thing was aluminium because it had to be light, of course. It was going on a rocket and going on a moon. It was mounted on the chest. Now, of course, again, look at the gear that he's wearing, and he's under a huge head dome that had no viewfinder. They couldn't have used it even if there was one. Simple reason, they couldn't see it. How would they know they'd taken a picture? They're using great big mechanical gloves, and the button for this is the big black thing down the bottom here. That's the shutter for the Hasselblad camera. So they wouldn't even know if they pressed that properly because they're in these huge reinforced gauntlets. They wouldn't have heard it because, of course, there's no sound in space. So if no sound in space, hi Cliff, then you're looking at no noise whatsoever, so you wouldn't hear a click. They can't see a counter going round because, again, they're inside the big helmet, and the counter is, in fact, the second wheel down here on the side. So, again, totally out of sight, no viewfinder. The button is way round the front. Any visual focusing of the camera are these funny sort of bunny's ears adjusters at the root of the lens. And it's not designed, according to Hasselblad, we've made inquiries, Hasselblad admit they did not put any lead lining inside the camera. So what about the radiation on the photos, on the images? We're not talking digital cards here, guys. We are actually talking hexachrome film. It's a type of plastic. And on the moon, in direct sunlight, you're talking 240, 250 degrees C. That's hotter than water boils. In the shade, minus 240 degrees C. So you're trying to tell me that this plastic would work purposely, absolutely flawlessly, in that sort of heat and extreme cold. On top of that, an aluminium frame, which would basically be very under pressure from all the structural heat changes, thermal changes. The gearing inside the camera, tiny wheels, tiny cogs, expanding and contracting. Absolutely terrible. And to put the icing on the cake, it's run on batteries, 2 Varta batteries. Now, we all know little small batteries. Again, are we being asked to seriously believe that this camera and its batteries would work flawlessly in those sort of temperatures? I don't think so. We all know what happens to our camera images in the older days. Those of you that are a bit younger and used to just the digital stuff nowadays. In the old days, we used to have negatives in a little wallet. And when we went to the chemist and we got all our pictures processed. But had we had our camera with the film inside it go through the X-ray machine at the airport or through your customs area, chances are those X-rays would wipe out your images, or they'd put a big shadow across them. NASA has over 10,000 images allegedly taken from space, on the moon, etc., and not one of them has a dot out of place. not one of them has a smear across it from the radiation, the cosmic radiation, the gamma radiation, the solar radiation. Think about it, guys. We are being asked to believe this. Bottom right-hand side is a very pertinent statement. It comes from a film I've got in my care, which you can buy from your Amazon USA. It's called American Moon, and it's basically stating quite clearly from NASA that any subject that we photograph will be in full and complete sunlight or full and complete shade. There is no middle ground here. We don't have an atmosphere up there like down here. So there is no partial change in light. It's going to be light or it's going to be dark. Temperatures are going to be extortionately hot or within about 10 seconds, extortionately cold. So remember that as you look at the next panel over. The iconic image of man on the moon. This is Edwin, it's not Armstrong. We have a strange thing about this is that Edwin, Buzz Aldrin seemed to refuse to take pictures of Neil Armstrong on the moon. We don't know why. We've heard rumours, but I'm not going to say any about that because I don't put people down. But suffice to say that he didn't want to take pictures of Neil Armstrong. Armstrong apparently has taken pretty much everything that you see on the Apollo 11 moonshot. But also we've got to think here with this full and complete sun or full and complete shadow. What is he doing standing in a spotlight? Look at the fall off. Actual professional photographers have actually seen all of these pictures and they've said that cannot be. And I've got other pictures further around, I'll explain more about that. But the astronaut standing there seems to be in a total area that's been enhanced by contrast, but it's in total area of spotlight. And you have the fall off above and a little bit down here in this corner as well and along the bottom. Now, for that to actually take place, he has to be in a spotlight. That will not happen with the sun. So again, this iconic picture of astronaut man on the moon, astronaut, doesn't seem to actually add up. It doesn't make sense. And again, the next shot along, we seem to have the lander going off to the moon to land on the moon. And yet, what's all this shading all over it? What's that massive glow here on the left-hand side? The sun doesn't do that and then leave all this dark or shadier. And what's the big shadow at the top corner? That looks to me like one of the big shutters that used to be on the edges of the spotlights in a studio. And the light has just caught it and it's been caught into shot. So again, very, very doubtful. Top here, we have, of course, Buzz Aldrin coming down the ladder from the LEM, allegedly on the moon. Now, if you look at the back of the bell housing here, that is completely black. So where's all the light coming from? What's lighting him up? How are all these rungs lit up with a reflection of something? He's standing in complete and utter darkness. How can we see inside the entry hatch area? This should be utterly, utterly black. You cannot get that. Well, you can, but it has to be in a studio. Bottom left. This one here, again, look at this side of him is completely illuminated. All the side flashes of white here. Again, all the steps. You can see inside the entire hatch area, protected on three sides. The sun is meant to be coming this way. It's meant to be on the other side of the LEM. So what's that doing lit up? That should be in complete and utter darkness. And again, lower centre, we have Buzz Aldrin standing in the footpad of the LEM. You can see by the shadow around him, it's completely black. And yet he's lit up like a Christmas tree. How? The sun is way off to the right. And yet you can see every detail on his outfit. We're getting close, guys. Have a little look at that one. Have a look at his shoes. Have a look at the boots that he's wearing. You see the white flash in both boots. That's a reflective flash. Either someone's taken a flash photography or they've bounced light off a reflector board. Now, what they used to do in studios, in film studios, if they wanted to light up some part of the set, they would actually have a large white board to the right of the subject. They would bounce light onto it, and then from that, bounce light off of that board to illuminate the subject. And again, gentlemen like Massimo Mazzucco, who's an Italian photographer, Benetton. They've had various other photographers for Prada, for Gucci, all examine these prints, and they've all said the same thing. That is not possible. The only way that that's possible is if you bounce light off a second source and it's reflected in his boots, so you can confirm what they've said, and he then gets lit up. So again, that shouts to me a studio shot. Lower right hand side, here we have Apollo 17 just erecting the flag, and of course, why have we got a flash above the astronauts? What was quite commonplace is to account for getting the right movement of the astronaut is to actually attach them to cables. And they would usually cover all these cables as best they can, and then they would just bounce around on the sets and get that sort of weightlessness simulated. But every now and again, some little part of the cable that wasn't quite covered properly catches, catches the spotlight. And by catching the spotlight, we get a glare. Now you can watch this yourself by going to the old spacecamp.com, and you can download all the videos, the DVD footage, everything else that they've now put onto that so that you can look at all the film of the space landings and the bouncing around, setting up equipment. You can watch it all, and that spot now miraculously disappears. I wonder why. What does it give away? Now again, we have a situation that we bring into question is actually under the LEM. You've got a 10,000 pound thrust engine there, a huge engine, and that engine you can compare to the Learjet, a business jet. 10,000 pounds per square inch thrust engine. Yes, it probably wasn't fully blasting as it was trying to land on the moon, but it was still strong enough to blast away all the dust. Well, actually, no, it wasn't. According to NASA, this is the view under the LEM on the Apollo 11 mission. And if you look, not even tiny little stones moved out the way. No dip at all under the bell housing of a rocket. Even running at 4%, that would have moved something. We know it was running right the way down to the ground because Armstrong himself actually states on radio, touchdown, engine shutdown. So that would imply that engine was still blowing right above that powdery surface and nothing disturbed. Again, question. You have the debunkers that say, oh no, the engine was pretty much off, so there was no way it was going to disturb anything. Okay, well then we'll ask a different question. How are the foot pads absolutely dust free? Now, the debunkers say, oh well, the engine blew the dust out the foot pads. No, you can't have it both ways. Either that engine was off and it was really, really weak, and you can see on umpteen video footage of the landing that the Apollo 11 was throwing up loads and loads of dust as it came down. You can see it on their own footage. And none of it landed in the footpad. Or the engine was strong enough to blow that all out, but there was absolutely no pieces of dust cleared away from underneath the actual bell housing. Sorry, I don't believe it. Again, top right, we have another image here. This time, again, Buzz Aldrin coming down the ladder. And again, from the glare, you can see the sun would be on the left-hand side of the LEM. And again, he's lit up. You can see everything about him. And yet, according to NASA themselves, he should be in complete shadow. Now we have, really for me, one of the proof P's. This is Apollo 17, an image shot from space, apparently from the moon, showing the Earth way, way, way off in the distance. Now, let's get in close to the flag, lower center. If you look at that flag, again, you guys can all move up to the picture and have a good old look. You can clearly see the flag is wet. It's actually drying back. You can see the shadow above it. You can see the stars and stripes, but you can clearly see that a lot of the blue and the stars on the lower center picture are wet. And there is a light blue edge to them where clearly the edge of that flag is drying back. That can't be on the moon. You're in a vacuum. You're at minus 240 or plus 250. There is no way that you can have a wet flag on the moon. Impossible. Science would show you that. Now again, we have another question. Lower right of this panel, we have Alan Shepard taking out the lunar rover on Apollo 15, and he's taking it from the LEM. Okay, no big deal. Except if you look at the blueprints of the LEM, where that rover is located is actually taking up the space where a pressure tank should be. Now, when the LEM was created, it needed a pressure tank to force the gases into the bell housing where they automatically chemically combust and burst into life and into fire. So if he's now got rid of that tank, or the specialists have, and they've popped a rover in there instead, how does the LEM fly if the actual engine is off? There's no fuel being pushed through to the bell housing because that pressure tank is missing. So again, we're asked to believe this. Top left of the next panel along, again, getting close and have a little look. You will find there is a stack of Scotch tape used on it. How can they stick pieces of heat shield together? Yes, it's got to be thin, says the debunkers. It's got to be a flexible seam to allow for contraction and expansion under the heat and cold. I ask, well, again, how can Scotch tape, what we would call in England sellotape, how can Scotch tape withstand those temperatures? Plus 250, minus 240. How can that plastic tape hold? Second, what happens to our cars, our vehicles, when they're sat in the sun for God knows how long? They cook, basically. First thing we usually do, or I certainly do, is get in the car, you open all the windows up, get rid of some of the temperature. It's absolutely cooking. This thing's sitting in plus 250 degrees C. And you tell me all of that held, it didn't curl up, didn't dry out. Don't believe it. Don't believe it. And here another lovely shot from the moon, having a wonderful look at Earth. Now, hold on a minute. Let's just go back a bit over here. What's happened to this distance here? That's from the moon, apparently. And now suddenly, it's got a heck of a lot closer. And on top of that, if you actually bring the contrast up on that, you will find a box around the Earth image. So that shows this is a composite. You can't see it on this one, but if you actually had the original and then it's enhanced all the contrast side of things, you find that that Earth is actually in an oblong box. So that shows that was a totally separate image, and it was added to the overlay of this moon shot. So again, why do they keep doing this? Why are they giving us false images? It brings a lot of things into question. Top right hand side, of course, is the lunar rover. And again, what is one of the other big key issues about being on the moon? Well, yes, you're going to be in a non-pressured environment. So you're in a vacuum. In a vacuum, there's no moisture. So how is all this mud and ash and powder sticking to the wheel? The moment that thing moves, that should literally become clean. It would all just drop off. There's no way it would have the moisture to stick to anything, to become glutinous. So it should immediately fall off, but it didn't. That thing drove around in various parts of the video, and you can see a stinkingly filthy wheel on the thing in various places. And again, one of the other questions we have is, why no tracks? Time and time again, we see images of the lunar rover, and it's not leaving tracks on the lunar surface. There are pictures all over their sites. Why? How? You know, surely if this thing's moving around, it's going to leave tracks. And yet, they've just recently given us another load of pictures, haven't they? And said, oh, all the images of the tracks and those little blurry, grainy things, that's the LEM that's been left behind on the moon. Are you seriously telling me I have to believe that? When there's a satellite now floating around, probably about 200 miles up above us, that can read the top line of a newspaper with you sitting in your back garden, and they can't take accurate pictures to prove without doubt that they'd been to the moon from just 20 miles up. Again, somewhere something doesn't add up. Stanley Kubrick, very, very good film producer. He was the producer of 2001, A Space Odyssey, and he was part of the NASA crew. Why? Why did they want a film producer in the science fraternity? And I'll tell you why. Because he was known for his backdrop projections. If you look at the 2001 Space Odyssey, you will see it time and time again. You will see, let's just say, those big monkeys, the big apes. There's a big scene for you. And you can see all those apes running around. And in the background, you can see the savannah. It looks like it's miles and miles of jungle back there. But if you look carefully, you'll find this. No, not a red line, but you'll see a very, very weird break in the continuity. You can see it on the next shot, bottom right down there. The studio seems to finish, and then the backdrop of those hills and mountains are actually projected onto the shot. And this is a Kubrick thing. So we always call this the Kubrick line, or the Kubrick separation line. And you find that time and time again on these NASA images. All over these images, you will find this really weird line going across the center of the image or from corner to corner, and the backdrop is projected. He used to project an image onto a screen, and then that screen in turn would project onto a backdrop. Let's go up to the first panel. Again, we have images here of the lunar rover. And look again at this line coming right across. Another Kubrick line. Again, top center. Line coming right across behind the astronaut and then off to the right-hand side of the screen or of the shot. Clearly projected backdrops. And that brings into question whether they're actually on the moon at all, or whether this was done in a studio. Now, you will also find from time to time little images like this. These are actual designs that the astronauts had on their legs or on their arms to show them what they had to do when they were actually on the film set. They had to drive through craters, around two other craters, back through the last crater, and then zoom back to their starting position. And they made a boo-boo with this as well, because they left an extra name here, Jones. Who's Jones? We had Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, and Buzz Aldrin, or Edwin Buzz Aldrin. Who's Jones? Is he another photographer? Is he actually getting the shot that they want for promotional purposes? Don't know. Bottom left, typical rally car down here on Earth, zooming around in a dusty environment, kicking up loads and loads of dust. Why are we getting dust like that? Why are we getting those sort of clouds? Well, quite simply, because we're in a pressured environment. We're in an atmosphere. So we're getting clouds like that, which keep the small particles of dust up in the air just that little bit longer than the big particles of dust. So you get a cloud. On the moon, of course, there's no atmosphere. You're in a vacuum. So what you should get is all particles, when they leave the wheel, act exactly the same. It should be a parabolic arch. So all the dust will go up, across, and down in exactly the same way. Now look behind the wheels of the lunar rover down there on the bottom right. There's clouds all around the wheels. That's impossible on the moon. Can't be done. Everything should act like the lower center, the parabolic arch. And yet you've got clouds of dust all around the wheels. Gets you thinking. Go to the next panel. Now this one will give you a bit of a giggle. You can get in close and have a look at this one in a tick. But if you look very cleverly at this reflective lens of the astronaut standing here, you can see a huge glaze of light, which they try and pass off as the sun. Photographers say that wouldn't act like that in the reflective, and the reflection actually shows a cirrus spotlight, which is about 25,000 candle watt power. But if you look carefully, there's a couple of little white dots just to the left of it, which clearly show it's actually in a studio. Do have a look, have a little couple of seconds and have a peep. You can clearly see some dots to the left of the main illuminative, if you say, light, and clearly showing it's actually other spotlights around it. Now, this is also meant to be a piece of equipment that has solar panels attached to it. Pardon me, but what is directly above his head looks to me like a piece of MDF board. Doesn't look anything like a solar panel I've ever seen. Again, top center, we have the Stanley Kubrick line again, between the edge of the studio surfaces and a projected backdrop. But what's this? What's this halo around the photographer? And all this drop off either side? You know, how can we have different angled shadows? That doesn't make sense with one light source. 2 or 3 light sources, yes, but not with one. And the sun does this. This is what the sun does. It lights or illuminates things evenly. It does not illuminate things in an intense spotlight like that. Doesn't add up. Again, we have the same thing here again. Huge halo. And then all this drop off around the sides. Sun doesn't do that. Whoops, today I just punched my microphone. The sun doesn't do that. Completely level, even. And again, down the bottom left, we have the chap here walking away in the distance. And all the rocks that are on this side, they're black, they're dark. So the sun's ahead of him. But why isn't his back in shadow? Why is he still lit up? A little bit of shade around him, yeah, I'll give him that. But he should be pitch black. And one of the other really great ones that you see on numerous shots of the footage on across a few of the Apollo films is this rock. And this rock appears on more than one occasion here, and you see it's got a letter C carved into it. Now, again, that doesn't make sense. What's the C for? Well, I'll tell you, on movie sets and film sets, the C simply stands for paper mache. So it's there, like the Mr. Hulk, for instance. You remember the old green Mr. Hulk in his films? He knew which rocks to pick up because he could throw them a really long way. But here, this one's paper mache. So they must know not to cut that one or not to break that one open. So they put a C on it. So when they're told, oh, can you bring back some rock samples? They don't start chopping into that because they'll see all the wire and paper inside it. And again, down on the bottom right here, we've got lens flare. But what are the two lights? I've seen lens flare many times. And please note, the shape of the lens flare from that particular lens is hexagonal. Now, I don't know what these two white dots are all about, unless they're spotlights, but the hexagonal lens is correct. The Hasselblad had a hexagonal shutter behind the lens surface. So if you've got any lens flare off a Hasselblad, it would have a hexagonal lens flare like that. Let's go up the ramp behind you guys. I call this top image here, now you see me, now you don't, because it has two main faults on it. First of all, it looks like they've actually removed the lem so they could redress the surface, ready for the next bit of filming. Now, that's not possible on the moon as far as I know without taking off. So, you know, where did that go? And two, not just the lens flare, but look at the lens shape. It's circular. Now, they only took Hasselblad cameras to the moon. So where did this circular lens camera come from? And it's again on the next shot. That's a circular lens flare, not a Hasselblad hexagonal lens. Center top. This is Apollo 12. One of the astronauts there. I think it's all set. Yeah, all set. Setting up a piece of equipment. Look at the state of it. It's covered in mold. One, that's not possible. Again, it needs moisture. Two, NASA themselves say all our equipment goes from clean rooms straight onto the rocket. So where's all the mold come from? It is believed that on occasion, we've actually got people laying claim that some of the equipment that NASA used was left out in the rain. So are they showing that this is, in actual fact, nothing to do with a clean room or anything like that? We're not quite sure, but it seems that they want to draw attention to it by holding it that way when pictures were taken. You have Neil Armstrong, of course. According to the book at NASA, it's actually relaxing in the lem after his moonwalk. Look in his eyes. Two distinct spots of light. You don't get that without a flash. Look at Buzz Aldrin. The light source, if anyone tries to say it's the window, is actually behind him. But again, he has spots in his eyes. Can't do that without a flash. And we're told no flashes went to the moon. And what's Aldrin doing with his sunglasses? You certainly couldn't put them on over the top of your blooming headpiece, could you? That was huge. So what's he doing with sunglasses? That doesn't make sense. Now, one of the big questions we ask as conspiracy theorists is why no flame? You'll see time and time again the actual cockpit part of the LEM taking off from the moon to rejoin the orbiter, in this case piloted by Michael Collins. And the debunkers will actually turn around to us and say, well, it's because, you know, the hypergolic fuel doesn't give off any flame. Well, this is a Draco engine in a inverted chamber, a chamber basically which has zero pressure. And I can see a flame from here. You know, it's a big white thing, you know, I mean, come on. There's your Draco again. And they will probably quote you, let me see, the Triton rocket, which when that took off from Cape Canaveral, I think it was, it had almost a clear flame when it took off. Well, yes, I'm fine. I'll give it all of that. So hypergolic fuel will burn clearly. Yes, probably will. But in space, it will show a vapor trail. So all of these are from the Soyuz craft coming in to dock with the International Space Station, one of our shuttles, and the International Space Station, all of which show a white residual flame or white residual water vapor, clearly showing the energy which is being used from the hypergolic fuel. So, as we go through to the next panel, why no flame under the capsule? Now, we're told, obviously, that engine is going to be blasting off at full power. It's going to be taking off and zooming it back up to link with the orbiter. I don't see any flame under there. I don't see any water vapor showing under there. And a lot of people say that that, in fact, was just a model on elastic. And it was super filmed. So they zoomed the camera right in to try and create that effect. Here we have images of that about to sort of depart. And you can see all the paint peeling up there. The panels don't even match up. They don't even meet. That thing would have been depressurized in a second, in a heartbeat. And here we have one of them, I think this is Apollo 15, taking off, and all these back panels are actually blown out. And yet if you listen to the audio for that takeoff, oh, it's very quiet, very peaceful, nice, easy takeoff. And yet those panels are clearly blown right out. And why don't we hear any engine noise? Ah, well, you're in a vacuum. You don't have any noise in a vacuum. Yeah, I agree with that. But inside the LEM, they're in a pressured environment. So every time you tap anything, we should hear it on the microphone. Ah, no, so the debunkers, the microphones are really, really sensitive, but they've got to be right against the mouth to pick anything up. Is that so? Okay. Well, again, let's go to Apollo 15. When they took off from the moon, allegedly, one of the actual astronauts, or the commander, whichever it was actually playing a piece of music on his Walkman type thing as he was taking off from the moon. And the microphone picked it up good as gold. But what was missing in that audio? No engine sound. You heard him going up, you heard him having a play with his music, but there was nothing behind him sort of going because that thing was throwing itself out at 10,000 pounds PSI. But not one hint of noise. We're being asked to believe this. Now we come to another big section of this. How do we have shadows running horizontally from these rocks and yet at an angle from the astronaut? Again, utterly impossible. You cannot have that unless you've got more than one light source. And of course, technically, on the moon, you haven't. You've only got the sun. So how have we got two separate sets of sources going in different directions? Again, down the bottom here. Again, the strange circular lens flare, which shouldn't be for a Hasselblad camera. Two, you've now got another lot of shadows. From here, we have a horizontal, and then from the stones, we have a 45-degree angle. Can't be. Look at the shadows here. This is the sun. Everything is leaning the same way. Everything leaning the same way. That's the sun. So what's all this? What's all that? And what is all of this? This is a blow up of the same shot you've just seen. And again, clearly horizontal and 45 degrees. The photographers actually said when they saw this one, there has to be a light source right here, just on the edge of the photograph. Well, the sun's a few million miles away. There's no way it can be just outside that image. That is in a studio. Now we have another lovely image here. This is apparently a window on the Apollo vehicle heading off to the moon. They claim that it's actually halfway to the moon. Well, sorry, if it's halfway to the moon, and that's meant to be between the two layers of glass, the outside temperature, if that's in shadow, is minus 240 degrees. And if you are in a weightless environment, what's the water doing running down the window? That implies gravity. Sorry, doesn't add up. Now, right at the beginning, we mentioned the Van Allen radiation belts. Let me give you a couple of things that people have been saying. This young lad works for NASA, Kelly Smith. It's part of their engineering staff on the new Orion project, which is endeavoring to create a capsule and send it out further than we've ever been before. His words, 3,600 miles up. Well, hold on a minute. We've been 240,000 miles up. So how is 3,600 miles up further than we've ever been before? We will be taking readings within the Van Allen radiation belt And once our scientists have studied these, we will hopefully be able to send men through this region of space. NASA. Apparently, we've already sent 18 people through this region of space. So what on earth is he talking about? Or maybe we haven't. Maybe that's what he's trying to say. And this gentleman is actually echoed. Terry Virts was the commander in 2015 of the International Space Station. He gave an interview, basically live, from them floating away quite happily in LEO, or low Earth orbit. He was floating there with his lady assistant, and they were answering questions. And he said, quite categorically, which echoes what this chap said, basically, LEO, or low Earth orbit, is as high as we can go right now. Once we have the building blocks in place, we will be able to visit asteroids, Mars, and the Moon. NASA's own commander. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time. I hope I've given you something to think about, or to go and research and do your own bit of digging. But I appreciate you coming tonight. I hope you've enjoyed the little tour. Thanks very much indeed.
Pretty
Thank
cool. I wouldn't say I'm convinced, but it's enough to make me go Google.
Thank you. You're going to go Google hunting. Okay.
You know
Kelly
it.
Smith and Terry Virts are available on YouTube. You can find their interviews on YouTube. So you can
Videos
actually hear
are
their
fine.
own words for yourself. But it gets you thinking. It gets you thinking.
Mm-hmm. Pretty
That's
interesting.
all I want to do.
All right.
Okay, guys.
All right.
Have fun.
Thank you, Snake.
Thanks a lot. Wee.
So who's a believer?
Who's a believer? Yeah. I'm a believer. I'm a believer.
I don't try.
I've got to be honest and say, the more I've researched into this, the people like Marcus Allen have spent 25 years looking at it. Scott Henderson, 30 years. Massimo Mazzucco has not just looked at it, but he's put out a DVD called American Moon. You guys can buy it from USA Amazon for about $19. And it's just called American Moon, and it's brilliant. It's a combination of all his research and putting all these pictures in front of photographers who have been in that business for God knows how many years. And they, every single one of them to a man, says studio, Sirius Light, studio. No way that any of those photos come out as legitimate. But as I say, don't listen to me. Go do your own digging, and you'll be surprised at what you find out there. Absolutely amazing.
Touching on that, there's a film that was just released about landing on the moon, and
Yep.
they basically they did it from the side of the conspiracy that
Uh-huh.
the guys from NASA didn't know that they never landed on the moon. It was actually the not the FBI, but the
All you would need
don't know whoever.
is one satellite and control of the relay dish. That's all you would
Yeah.
need. So the very first people that were fooled would be their own NASA people, and then the rest of the world, because they would just control what information went out from that dish. Now, if you listen to some of the voice recordings, they sort of say, "Okay, Buzz, can you just take a piece of that rock up there?" "Yeah, okay, Houston." "Well, hold on a minute. That's got to travel 240,000 miles to the moon, and then 240,000 miles back to the receiver dish. That's about 1.3 seconds each way, 2.6 seconds. And they have numerous audio recordings that they've timed the transmit and the delay to 1.1 seconds and 0.9 at one point. Now, how can that be when it's meant to be a minimum of 2.6? Unless they were down here. They weren't on the moon at all.
They had Vodafone.
Yeah, exactly.
Vodafone connection. 5G.
Grisham actually said, before he unfortunately passed away in that big fire on Saturn 1 thing, that how can we talk to each other from the moon when we can't even talk to each other through factories? You know, because they couldn't sort the radio connection back out to the LEM. when the LEM was being designed, it was so full of faults. The fuel tank blew up twice. The chairman of NASA retired in October 68, right on top of the actual taking off to the moon. The debunkers say, tell you what, moon rock, we got tons and tons of moon rock, that proves we went. Really? Okay, what was Werner von Braun doing in the Antarctic in 67? He was actually looking for meteorites. He says for reference purposes, or was it to pass off actual asteroid rock as moon rock? Because anybody who tested it would say it came from space. He was looking for resources. 10 years later, Armstrong went to Holland with a piece of moon rock and presented it to their big science exhibitions out there. So there you go, an actual piece of moon rock. Brilliant, thanks very much. Then the whole science place was being refurbed and rebuilt and repaired and all that stuff. And the science community out there said, can we have that moon rock? Can we do some tests and things on it? Certainly, they said, there you go, knock yourself out. When they came back, they were very, very apologetic, but it's a piece of petrified wood. It's not moon rock at all. And Armstrong gave this to him. So, again, too many questions, too many doubts. Go do your research and you'll be surprised what's out there. Unbelievable.
That film's called Operation Avalanche, if you just want to watch it.
Okay.
It was out
Super, I
in
will. Cheers for that.
2016. It's on
Excellent.
Netflix and stuff, I'm sure it is.
I'll add that to the collection.
It's a good film.
Good film. Excellent stuff. Well, Nera, I think you're a new one on me. Hi. Welcome, welcome.
Hello.
I saw you pop in, etc. And I thought, that's not a name I know. Where's this lady come from?
Sorry, can you hear me?
Oh,
Yeah.
we can do now. Yep. Welcome,
Okay,
welcome.
I was muted because I have children and I just didn't want them ruining your presentation.
That's okay. No worries. I'm very laid back.
No, I have never seen anyone in Somnium space. This is my first time in here being able to talk with other people. I always come in here and it's a ghost town. So
Well-
I saw you put the live thing and I was like, there's people in there. So
There's people.
I tried to get it updated and make it in enough time. So I'm glad. It was
That's
a good
okay.
presentation. It was very interesting.
Thanks. Yeah, well, quite often I will say to people, we may seem empty, but I bet you now there will be a heck of a lot more than just us here. There's probably out people checking their plots and people building plugged in somewhere. You know, we keep
People-
nudging Arthur to try and get him to have a player counter on your hand or a panel or something in the plaza so you can see who's on. And it's worth exploring then because someone out there on the mountain or you got to find them. It's a huge world.
Yeah, we need
So,
a live map
yeah,
for
it's great
that.
fun. But, it would be easy. At least you know there's people on somewhere.
Is anybody
they're
ever
not here,
timed
they're on
walking right
another
across
world.
the thing yet?
Yeah. I mean, you're probably
What's that?
talking.
You ever
15,
timed
20
yourself
minutes?
to try and walk across this place?
Oh,
I've
Yeah.
tried
I've
to
never
go from one
timed
side
myself.
Yeah,
Honestly,
15
the
to
farthest I
20
think
I've
minutes
walked
to
is
go from
mountain to
middle to
mountain.
mountains. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
But-
obviously the 2D and I'm a lot slower now. And I went to my plot way over the other side. It took me 25 minutes to get there. I was like,
And this
What?
is it, isn't it, though? You go to some of these VR worlds and it's like, boom, straight into a box, you know, or you're into a little area like, I mean, what's the alt space? Great little place, but you go down, you've got a campfire. That's your lot. You know, here you have anything up to 8 acres of scale of land. So it's just like you walk and walk and walk, you know, you're not restricted by a little box or a little immediate boundaries around the area that you teleport into. You know, it's a
I
huge
can tell that
it's
is messing with frames per second, though. My FPS is pretty low being in here, especially when I turn and look at a bunch of avatars. That is the price you pay for something expensive like this. I'm actually from in alt space.
there you
They've
go.
made it even
Super
worse, actually. They put you in an info zone now that looks like a children's fair, and I don't know how they're going to retain any customers because it's just like kids screaming, and you have to make an account before you can even leave it. I can tell you if I would have done that, I would have ended up in there, heard all of that, seen balloons and a fair, and been like, I'm getting the hell out of here. Like,
Well, this is it. I mean, the the whole thing that we've said is that, I mean, such as I mentioned alt space, but VR chat, high fidelity, a lot of these we feel, I mean, they're in themselves, they are great little places, and we got take hats off to them. They've got a great communities and all this sort of stuff. And they did all this educators, etc., which we did the end of the week wrapping up thing. But the detail for me is cartoony, and I'm sorry. Look at the trees, you know. I mean, look at the bark on the trees, you know. Look at the grass, the bushes. Everything is so much more detailed here, and I've got to be honest and say that's the reason I stick around.
Well, I mean, I don't like that. I mean, yeah, it's good that we focus on trees or stuff like that. But
Detail.
now the character is not that complicated as there are in VR chat. So
Quite.
you paid a price.
This is something we've mentioned as well. We said we want to get away from the cartoony type avatars.
Yeah, because like right now I can't move my fingers more than
Right.
Ben,
five.
that's about your lot. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Well, low poly is
I look
essential
like
for
shit.
performance in social VR apps. That's why
Yeah,
I
but-
tend to build
Yeah.
more realistic in alt space. I build in there, and like I actually just did like a huge, very realistic fireworks show for a New Year's event in there.
cool.
It is possible, but it took me. I talked to Arthur about it when he was in there on a panel recently. It took me about a month and a half, and it wasn't actually building the space or building all the particle effects in Unity. It was making it performant for the Gear VR, the Go, the Quest.
Yeah.
I wanted to make sure every headset saw the same thing, you know, had the same experience at the same time, because I always call that like VR schizophrenia. That's not fun when you're standing with someone and you're like, look at that bird. And mobile users are like, what birds? You know, like
Yeah,
that was just
correct.
too much. So they took the birds away for them. You know, like that's horrible, I think, you know. So I try to build everything on the same level, but it does take a lot of time to learn all
Yeah.
of those things for optimization. And
Definitely.
so,
Well, I mean, again, I think if you look
Sure.
at the root size of the launchers, you're looking probably between 370, 380 to say 450 for most VR worlds. We're on 3 gig for this one. It's an insane amount of launcher, and this is why it's so bloody buggy. And we keep saying to Arthur, you know, it's great, fabulous, and we love it to pieces, but we just want to make it so smooth for people. He's just such a dedicated guy and such a dedicated devs team that, you know,
Yeah.
they are just on it 24/7, bless them. And they will get it running absolutely spot on. I mean, Mickey, you've just come onto the devs team, haven't you? So you know,
Yeah.
you're right there, hands on. And
Still learning
they're
the whole
so dedicated for what they're doing, you know. And when you
I
think
wonder what
3
Township
gig,
Tale uses. Has anybody ever been in there? Because that's another
which one?
sort of like procedurally generated, and they have very heavy, I mean, detailed avatars and a lot of stuff in there. It's like, I don't know
Well,
what
I
they're
mean,
doing
no.
in there. That's
they don't have the same amount of animations. It's a lot more simplistic in that part. So all the like right now, you have good graphics that's running a lot of things, right? But in Town Sale you have good graphics running like less things, if you understand.
yeah. But it is still
But
like
they
pretty impressive
sacrificed
that they've pulled that off in there. You know, like
Are they
I
not
was
mirrored
surprised.
areas though within their one? Like they're still blocks, and you can't physically interact with the other side until you actually cross the barrier.
right. I know we've got with our teleporters, we're linking
Because right now we can
all the worlds
see
as well.
way over there,
that's good.
and we could actually physically see somebody walking about like
Yeah.
way over the other side, and they could wave to us and we could see them. I don't know if they've got that in other places. I think that was what Arthur was pushing, the persistent kind of thing.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, so-
And I mean, you have to have quite a few LOD models to help with that. That will help with that, you know. I know AltSpace does too, because if you teleport up to somebody, as soon as you teleport to them, like there's this brief moment of time when you do that, this window where you see the avatar look really shitty. Because you see the lowest level of detail model, and then it
It's
like
really shitty.
right, and then it just snaps into view, and you're like, oh, hello, so and so. It's like you almost can't recognize them until they clear. It's kind of a fun little Monet game to play.
Teleports in here, you can actually see them like almost Superman fly to that
Yeah.
position. It's quite funny.
Yeah, that's funny. That is. When you jump, it's almost like you stick your legs out at a funny angle and you just.
That's
Cool.
I
funny.
mean, this is the most fun part. Look, I can do this. Wait. There.
Yeah.
I'm not standing on myself. Oh shit.
Oh, you just hit your head. But yeah, so I mean, this
Did
is
anybody
it. I mean,
go to the HTC one in the conference in Engage?